Because if you're making 20,000 to 30,000 a month off music, I mean, that's solid money. I don't, that's nothing to shirk off. Some of these people, if they were independent, they might not be the global superstars that they are, but they might be a little bit more in control, and they might still be able to put out the music that they want to put out. And maybe I would be happier. Maybe I wouldn't have to get fake teeth and get a bunch of gold chains. I wouldn't have to do that because I'm living a lifestyle that's conducive for long-term success.
All right. Today we got Karl Fowlkes with us, who's back on the podcast from the Fowlkes Firm. You represent Blxst and a bunch of other artists, but we're here to talk about this guest piece that you wrote for Trapital, a really great piece about the future of the artist deal. So let's start at the top. Why did you want to write this piece?
Yeah, I think right now, historically, there's been a few players, and those few players are really just record labels. So it kind of pigeonholed what the deal was going to look like. Now there's so many different players out there. Technology is infused all through the music industry. So there's distributors, there's advanced companies, right? They're just trying to model what they can give you based on streaming algorithms. Companies like Beat Bread, for example, and then you still got those major labels there, sort of offering a lot of those services. So the landscape's so different. I think because there's so many different parties and so many different solutions, I think the deal has to change with the times that we're in. And oftentimes, what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing, those change deal terms. And, I just think it's something that we need to get ahead of.
Yeah. And I feel like now you're hearing more than ever people talking about ownership, artists, whether or not they may have enough behind it, want to make sure that they're owning everything when they're coming to try to negotiate contracts. Do you feel like that's shifted the landscape? I mean, I feel like it's definitely improved the conversation around it, but do you feel like that's actually having an impact on the deals that are being made?
Yeah, and it's been quite effective. I think most people who are in my position, doing deals on the attorney side are seeing contracts that, especially if there's any built up leverage, that almost exclusively, have a license period, right? So instead of the full transfer of ownership or work for hire language you've seen in the past, I'm seeing a lot more 20-year licenses, 25-year licenses, 15-year licenses. So the artist is, almost exclusively going to get the masters back. Now, some of the other top line terms might not be that different in terms of the royalty rate, or some, the ancillary income, but the ownership paradigm is definitely changing, and I think that's the unique thing about it today.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially with the major record labels, it's kind of two things happening, right? On one hand, your streaming revenues continuing to grow, and you have all these other revenue sources from outside of the digital streaming providers, whether that's with Peloton or Roblox and all these other partners that want licensing deals. So all that's increasing. But on the other hand, more and more artists are not going to want to just give up their masters in perpetuity. So the labels are also counteracting that piece of it. So I see them in a lot of ways. They're hoping that the revenue from all of these areas can offset the loss that's eventually going to come from the masters, because eventually you can't earn money from the back catalog forever if the current artists are going to keep that back catalog and the labels aren't going to be able to have it.
3,000%. So I think I almost wonder why some of the record labels out there don't sort of take from their publishing counterparts, right? Because the co-pub deal is sort of set up as a joint ownership structure, 50-50, right? So the songwriter usually owns half the composition, and the publisher owns the other half of the composition. And when the term is up, the songwriter can go do what they want with their 50%. And they could have, whoever collects on it. And then, the record label the publisher can take their 50% and go collect on it as well. So it's a shared equity model. It's something that I think tends to work for better parties. And I know there's some mechanisms that are a little bit different, as it relates to distribution of music and then collect versus collection of music. But I think that's sort of a precursor to, maybe something we'll see, happen over the next 10 to 20 years.
What do you think the next 10 to 20 years will look like? Because I often have this conversation with a lot of people. Some people go to the extreme of being like, no, record labels will be extinct by then. And I've never quite gone to that perspective just because I think people still ignore the desire that people have to be the biggest star in the world and where they feel like they need to go in order to do that. But I do think that we'll likely see more of these shared equity or more of these flexible options. Because I feel like one of the things you highlight in the piece is that it's great that there's so many distributors and places that you can release your music, but it's still a pretty big difference where it's like, okay, you either got to give up everything and we'll make you a superstar, or you try to do it your own, but it's still hard to get to that level without some additional support.
Yeah, I think the next 10 to 20 years are going to be a very interesting time. And I don't think anything's going to be figured out in the next 10 to 20 years, just because I think there are so many different emerging business models, right? Like I keep talking about these music tech companies kind of coming in and offering, using algorithms and formulas to sort of create a estimate on what your royalties will make in the next 3 to 4 years. They'll give you a big advance too, right? And I referenced Beat Bread because I just saw they did that for a massive artist recently, and they're not offering service or anything. We're just going to give you that funding element. And I think historically, if you look at startups, and there's always been a lot of artists, our founders conversation in the past 5 years. But when you look at a lot of startups, it's really hard to scale a business without capital. So capital is always going to be sort of the driving force on any decision I think you have to make in your business journey at a certain point. So I think what will happen is labels will realize, I think, the all or nothing approach of sort of either doing a license deal or completely owning the masters isn't really probably in anyone's best interest, including theirs. And I think we'll see more shared equity, right? And more investing in artists, being in business with an artist forever, but in a tasteful way, right? Like owning 20% of somebody's master for perpetuity seems a lot better than owning 100% of someone's master in perpetuity, right? There's like a natural for if you're an artist, you might be able to live with that. Hey, this person gave you $1 million. They have different access, resources, and funding opportunities throughout, and they have a history of helping artists. Why don't I? We can share this thing forever, but I'll be in control. I think that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and what I think it does is it itemizes how to look at the value add that you're either getting from a record label or from another type of partner, right? Because at its core, a record label deal is very similar to a private equity model. I know a lot of people make the venture capital comparison, but I think it's a bit more like private equity, or even more so an M&A deal, where you are essentially selling yourself as the business, at least to the recorded music business of what you're doing, to this company. And then in return, they are paying you for the services. And they're obviously going to try to maximize it as much as they can with everything they offer, from marketing to promotion to all the other services that you can essentially get, counsel, advice, so on. But I think the shift in what we're seeing a lot more artists do, more so I'd say on the independent side, but I think we'll see some of the bigger artists do it too. They want to create the business. They want to be the one that is doing the actual tasks. And how can they have, things set up around them in order to do that? And it's something we see with all creators to some extent, right? I feel like some people are always maybe they want to gravitate more towards the business side of things. Maybe they want to gravitate more towards the art that they actually do need to make. But still, if you're going to take the business side of it, then yeah, there's likely going to be a company you go to for marketing support. There's going to be a company you go to for PR or for distribution or for those things. And if you do it that way, then you're likely going to have a better approach about how you're making deals. And I feel like this is one of the key things that like you and I have been talking about for years now, just in terms of like how these things get set up and how these things should be set up, especially for the artists that are willing to put in the work.
Yeah, I think what artists and their teams too are realizing are, they're still doing a ton of work even after they sign to the record label, right? And I think some of those things historically that we maybe thought or attributed to a record label, whether it's right or wrong, are things that in this generation, teams, managers, other team members on that direct artist team are being tasked with, and and they're executing, to some extent, right? We're seeing TikTok campaigns being launched, and then that being the driving force of an artist being signed to a multi-million-dollar license deal, right? Because that artist and their team leveraged, that music technology to create some momentum and drive the price of that deal up. We're seeing a lot of that, so I think all that's making artists and their teams do is say, hey, if we're going to do a lot of the strategy and work to get signed, maybe signing doesn't necessarily make sense. Maybe we're looking for something else. Maybe it's not the traditional "we sign to you" model. It's like, let's partner. I need you for a few things. The rest we can take care of. We need some funding, and we need some support on, with radio. We need some of your tools that you might have in your staffing. But eventually, uh, we think we'll be able to do that stuff down the line. I think that's kind of the future. More sort of artist companies, and you see some of these catalogs, and you're like, yo, that's a mini company. I know you talk. We saw Timberlake's catalog, so for I believe roughly $100 million. But you think about companies that could sell for $100 million, like they have more than like two employees work. It's actually a company. Like there's people driving marketing campaigns. There's the human resources department. So I always think it's funny because when you actually look at the valuation of the IP and what something is actually making year over year, and that's a pretty sizable company that's probably not staffed correctly. I think that's probably what we'll see in the future. Is hopefully these companies and they can get staffed correctly.
And it makes you also think about, okay, let's take the Justin Timberlake example. Obviously, he's someone that had a very successful and still has had a very successful solo career. But how much more value could there have been if he had created things in the way that, we're talking about here? Obviously, there's a trade-off there because I do think he's clearly someone that benefited more than the average person for a number of reasons from the major record label system and the broader media system that we're in. But yeah, $100 million. Like you think about a startup that is reaching $100 million, you already have the idea of how big that startup is, what that startup trajectory looks like. And obviously, this is a little bit different because it's based on that recurring revenue stream. But still, I mean, it's huge.
Right, and I think like it's when we talk about sales, and when a company has to get due diligence done on them, right? So you look under the hood, and you're trying to see what that company actually owns. Do they even own the rights? Do they own the pub rights? Do they own the likeness? Do they own the trademarks? Right? But if a company, if an artist, driven company, and it doesn't have to be one artist, I think, obviously there's going to be a lot more collective and smaller labels, I think, in the future, that are successful in running this model. But if you do due diligence on a company and they do own all the IP, they do own all the trademarks, they do own the pub, and they do own the record, and there's employees in place, and there's procedures in place, and there's a history and books to sort of show what's happening over the past 5 to 10 years. You're right. Like, these evaluations are probably being done on just raw numbers. But if you were to factor in some of this other stuff, it's like, man, this is a well-oiled machine. This might be worth a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like once we're able to get there, a lot of it is focused on the type of deals people can make and how specific they're getting about these. And you have been pushing and promoting this acronym about how artists, and I think this even extends beyond artists, how anyone that is creating content or making any type of deal should be looking at things. So what's the advice there that you give for them, and what are the elements to look out for?
Yeah, yeah. A strategy I've sort of been using and created. I believe it was about a year and a half ago. In talking to a few clients was, length, obligation, money, and ownership. And those four key things are sort of the top line things you need to worry about when you're forming a contract. And I like to think about clients and people I'm talking to when I'm discussing Lomo, just prioritizing those things, right? Because you're not going to have the perfect deal where you have a short term, you get a lot of money, your obligation is low, and you get to own everything. That's just not realistic. What I do think is realistic is putting together a strategy that you could sort of put those things in order, and 5, 6, 7 years down the line, be happy with whatever sort of business you set up for yourself, because you knew what you were getting into, you knew what your priorities were, and sort of you knew what you were signing. So I think those four top line terms: length, obligation, money, and ownership, are the driving force of they're sort of the backbone of every contract. And for better or worse, I think those terms have decided whether an artist is going to be on Twitter in 5 years talking about how they hate their contract, or they're going to be on being able to sell their catalog for 50 to 100 million dollars in 10 years, right? So I think Lomo is really important, and it'll help you sort of prioritize your needs if you are an artist. And again, that's not just for the artist. That's for the artist team. That's for these collectives that are coming up. I think those are probably going to be the ones enforcing that strategy. But Lomo is very useful, I think.
You get Lomo trademarked?
I haven't got Lomo trademarked, man. That's crazy. Maybe after this episode.
I mean, I feel like you got like I mean, because that's so many of these things, right? How do you like simplify things to just make it clear and take away so much of the legalese that I think is in there at many times as a tactic itself to confuse artists?
Yeah, I mean, and again, like some of the you hire an attorney to do the hard legal work, right? That's like the job of when people are generally saying, artists, you need to understand your deals, we're not saying you need to become an attorney overnight, because you still need an attorney. You need someone that's someone else's job. Your job is to sort of run your company, have a little bit of insight on some of these objectives and stuff that you're building. But you should really have a key indicator of those top line terms. That's what you really need to know. You're not going to know what an indemnification clause is, or you're not going to get into the warranties and representation. That's not the best use of your time. But you should know how long the contract is. You should know how much money and how much royalty you're going to get, or how the royalties are even paid out. You should know what you're required to do. All those good things are the core of a contract, and I think that artists need to focus less on some of the nitty gritty of the. You're not going to read too much legalese in a contract, but those four things will help you understand what you're signing.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned earlier about the artists that are going to be on Twitter complaining about their deal. Is there an area of Lomo that you think they're most likely to complain about or have an issue about?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. I think oftentimes it's a combination of usually two things, but I think it's maybe the way royalties are paid out. I think once you really understand recoupment, it's not like a net profit. It's not like an off top thing. And what I mean by that is, if you're recouping at the royalty rate, that means if you have a 20% royalty rate, you got to make 5 times, to recoup, right? To get even, right? Because, if a dollar of money is generated, only 20 cents of that dollar is counting toward paying back the label, right? So you got to make 25 times over. I think that's the part that really rubs people the wrong way, right? Just because if it was a net profit situation or an off top, right? We all costs go toward recoupment, and then you get 80 and I get 20. It'd still be bad, but it'd be a little best. It'd be a little less bad. So I think it's that part of the money that really, really gets people upset, because I'm not even sure, these companies really don't have to do that. Like, that's just, and I'm not in the business of, I think that's when I don't care. Like, that's just stupid. That's a bad business model. I think that's the reason why a lot of disruptions happen, because that's so one-sided.
Yeah, it makes me think of Meek Mill when he had posted at some point earlier this year, I don't know when I'm going to get paid or I haven't gotten paid for this. And this is someone that, could sell hundreds of thousands in his first week with, I think at least he did with Championships or whatever the album was when he like first came out, Prison. But he still doesn't know. And he's also someone that runs a record label himself, or he has the joint venture with Rock Nation for his Dream Chasers. So it's like, even at that level, artists still don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Benny the Butcher, who's definitely a favorite rapper of mine. But I was listening to a freestyle yesterday. He did, I think, with Charlie Sloth out in London, and he said, these rappers, they're doing 100K first week, but they still not recouped. And I always that is interesting, right? Because we all care about these sort of these first week numbers, but how much money is it taking to get to those first week numbers? And still you're still probably in the hole depending on the advance you got. Advances are good, but it's also a way for you to continue to be locked in at a contract, right? Like, would you rather have? Some people want that $5 million check, but you lose leverage the more money you take. That's just the reality of it.
Right. Yeah, I think that Benny, of course, and I think Griselda overall, they figured it out in a model that actually works for them. And I think Russ probably falls in this category as well, where it's like, okay, we don't care about the first week numbers. We actually want to have a business that runs, right? So Griselda can sell $75 or $100 vinyls or, butcher cleaves or whatever it is in order to, have like high end merch that people are going to want to buy. And I think for a lot of artists, yeah, there is at least a bit of a trade off to some extent. Like, do you care more about the revenue or do you care more about the fame and the accolades and the media and stuff? And I don't think that's as black and white for most artists as they may think it is.
Yeah, because like the real metrics that people should care about, we're not in this all for money, but I think money and ownership, if you have those things and you're building a model that sort of is conducive, and not just because you're doing shows all the time. Like, I'm not sure Russ has to pop out at nightclubs, just to pay his bills. I know for a fact he doesn't have to do that, right? And that's sort of the flexibility and freedom that I think guys really want when they hop into the rap game. They want to be able to sit by the Dame Dash calls it that by the pool money, right? I want to put my feet up by the pool, have that residual income coming in, and and really be a boss, really be a CEO, not have to perform in Shreveport, Louisiana, at a nightclub to pay my bills because I'm not getting any money from my music. Streaming's not the best model yet from a payout standpoint, but because of how often and consistent people are streaming music, it's still an effective way for you to get money, right? So I think when Russ posts his TuneCore statements, that is obviously not everyone's going to have that sort of consistency and hard work, but a lot of that's real. I mean, if you have five, I always talk about that hip hop middle class that needs to emerge, and we need to be happy with. We need to celebrate those people, and because if you're making 20,000 to 30,000 a month off music, I mean, damn, you could talk about that's pretty. That's that's solid money. I don't. That's nothing to shirk off. But I don't think that's sort of in some of these people, if they were independent, they might not be the global superstars that they are, but they might be a little bit more in control. They might have less obligations, and for some people, and they might still be able to put out the music that they want to put out, and all that stuff sort of creates sort of a concoction of, man, maybe I would be happier. Maybe I wouldn't have to get fake teeth and get a bunch of gold chains. I wouldn't have to do that because I'm living a lifestyle that's conducive for long term success. So I think that's really important, there. I mean, that's kind of where I am, and that's kind of sort of the education that I'm putting out.
And I feel like that's also how you're building the businesses that you have and what you're associated with, right? I look at what you and Vic and the team are building with Blxst as well, and what you're building with EVGLE. And I feel like this is exactly that. Like, you're building the company that's structured around this. Can you talk a bit about how you all have things set up?
Yeah, yeah. So Eagle is a company that I am an equity partner in. It's me. Victor Burnett, who was the president and is also Blxst manager. And then you obviously have Blxst, who is the key cog, the creative genius, and really someone who's sort of been patient and made this all possible. But the way we're set up is we're a company privately owned, and we've been able to partner with entities and retain 100% ownership of IP. Make sure we're getting some of that that by the pool money at all times, and putting ourselves in a position for us to not just build vertically but horizontally. We're building out. We have a full staff. We have healthcare for everybody. We have an office space. All that fun stuff that I think that isn't probably celebrated enough in building a company, and particularly in hip hop. So that's kind of how we're building. And I think long term, we're empowering our artists and the people that come next to do the same thing. It's not going to be hey, you sign with EVGLE, where we're taking your masters and you're taking ownership and control of everything. That's just not what we're doing. And I think Vic and Blxst in particular are very very cognizant of that, and so I think we're trying to lead the way in that regard.
So is the plan to continue to build the company solely around the brand of Blxst himself as the creative, or do you also want to bring on other artists too?
So we already signed another, I'll call him multi-hyphenate, talent as well. He's an artist and producer. So we'll be rolling him out sometime later this summer, maybe early fall. And then we have another producer signed on, or partnered on the sometimes I use old terms, but partnered on the publishing side. So there are two other creatives already, in house. And I think the goal will be to get bigger, as time goes by.
And then in terms of Blxst specifically, what does his relationships look like with the major record label system and being able to amplify the work that he does?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. We obviously have a public relationship with Red Bull Records, who's our partner on the record side, and it's been a super fruitful partnership. Blxst has elevated his career. They've been really helpful in allowing EVGLE to stay 100% independent in building what we built. So kudos to Red Bull and those guys over there. And Red Bull's distributor is the Orchard. So we do have a, I guess, major label tie, right? So that's but that's really kind of I think all three of us, Blxst is a multi hyphenate to the truest extent ever. He can edit his own videos. He does his design work. He can produce his songs. He engineers it. Vic, similar type of talent. He's a merch guru. Great leader, great manager. And same with myself. Obviously, I'm a lawyer, but as an operator and someone who builds businesses on the sort of technical and admin side, I love that part. So we're talking about three people who are multi hyphenates. I think when you have people like that, you don't have to outsource as much throughout the different phases of growth. And we've been able to resist some of the pitfalls that other companies have had to go through, because we've been able to scale 2x to 5x by doing a lot of stuff in-house. And I don't think that's going to change. Our growth has been incremental and positive, year after year. And I think that's because we're taking the steps and we're not trying to build something really quickly.
Yeah, you're trying to build for the long haul, right? And if Blxst is someday going to have his triple figure catalog sale, if he ever wants that, that's going to be done by, building step by step. You're building for the long term, even though I'm sure right now, especially after the Kendrick feature, and he's just been blowing up, especially I feel like for the past 2 years now, but I feel like especially the past like 12, 18 months, you've been seeing more and more, at least publicly. I feel like it may seem like it, things are going fast, but I feel like, talking to you all, yeah, this is a long game.
It's a long game, and you also know, like, behind the scenes, we've been aggressive in diversifying our company profile and our portfolio and what we're trying to build. Outside of music, I think all of us also realize the entertainment industry is also just a vehicle to impact the world. So, at some point your vehicles change. And I think we also realize that, everything that we're building today, has to be bigger than just the industry that we exist in. That's just not, that wouldn't be fulfilling for any of us. So I think we're very cognizant of that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Good stuff, man. I am excited to see not just more change in the industry, but obviously I think you wrote this piece for a really timely reason, and we're going to continue to see the impact of that. So yeah, if you're listening, definitely go check out The Future of the Artist deal. That's up now on the Trapital website. And Karl, yeah, before we let you go, anything else that you want to plug or let the listeners know about?
No, man. I mean, honestly, just keep your eyes out for everything we're doing at EVGLE. I think there's going to be a lot of fun, disruptive stuff that we announce and we do over the next couple months to a year. And personally, the Fowlkes Firm is growing as a disruptor in the law firm space. Look out for those two things. And I just challenge everyone to challenge the status quo. That's what we're all here for.
That's the only way the industry grows, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I appreciate you, man.